round and round and round, and the world goes round and round. The world goes round and round and round.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Amy DeMast, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm the Director of Early Childhood Education and Family Engagement at Temple Sinai in Summit, and I'm also the current VP of Administration for ECE-RJ. As someone who's involved in conversations related to belonging in the LGBTQ plus community at my own synagogue, I'm particularly looking forward to this session. Eliana Rubin defines themselves as a queer trans artist and educator. They are currently studying for a master's in educational leadership at HUC-JIR. With a background in musical theater and songwriting, Eliana is able to combine these passions with education to create Jewish musicals called Juicicles. Don't miss that session on Saturday. And as you're about to see, a hugely engaging activist and speaker. Eliana, thank you so much for joining us.
Amy, thank you so much for that wonderful and generous introduction. Hi, everyone. How are you all doing today? I asked you a question and we're all on mute. That was silly of me to do. My name's Eliana Rubin. I am so happy to be here with you. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ plus education, diversity, inclusion in and out of the workplace and the classroom. Something that I want to just say at the forefront is, regardless of your level of experience or exposure or education within LGBTQ plus terminology, history, people, the community, you are welcome here. And I am so glad that you are choosing to spend your next few moments with us together. So I'm going to start out by sharing my screen, and let me see if I am going to do this correctly. Okay. Let's see here. Do you see the screen that says sexuality and gender diversity inclusion, and you don't see my speaker notes? Can I get a thumbs up? Super, amazing, we love it. Okay, so first off, I just want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I think personal connection is really important when it comes to these sorts of conversations and just in education in general. So first of all, I am from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised here. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and I grew up acting. I had been acting since I was around 2 or 3. My first performance was actually at my home synagogue's talent show. I won. It was a highlight of my life so far. And theater was where I found a really strong sense of community. I found a really strong Kehila Kadosha within the world of the arts and in the world of theater. Because I was acting, I felt really comfortable expressing myself, and I felt really comfortable trying new things and being silly in front of people. And as I was getting older and I started to explore myself, can you see my screen share or not right now? You can? Okay, great. As I was getting older, I started to question different parts of myself. And around the age of 12, I started to question my sexuality. Some of my friends who identified as boys really had big crushes on girls, and I had crushes on my friends who had crushes on the girls, and I thought, well, that's different. And so around the age of 13 or 14, I came out as gay, and that was the first of many coming outs that I have had thus far. When I was 18, I got into New York University's Tisch School of the Arts to pursue theater, and I moved across the country. I skipped everything in the middle, and I went to NYU from 2013 to 2017. I entered thinking I wanted to be an actor, and I left thinking I wanted to be a writer and director. My senior year musical was, or excuse me, my senior year thesis was writing and putting on a 45-minute musical parody of the Magic School Bus television and book series. And it was a lot of fun to be able to put that on. After I left NYU, I was questioning what I wanted to do with my life. I loved theater. I loved acting. I loved writing, directing, but I wanted to try some new things. I heard that there was a new URJ summer camp opening up called the URJ Six Points Creative Arts Academy, which is based outside of Philadelphia. And they were looking for their inaugural theater arts mentor for their first summer in 2018. I applied and I was hired. And it was at CAA that my second coming out happened. We were having an info session during staff week with Keshet, which is an organization that does LGBTQ plus Jewish education and trainings. And it was there that I learned about the term non-binary for the first time. And we're going to talk about terms in a couple of minutes. But non-binary basically means that someone might fall outside of the gender binary. The next day, we were doing a separate staff training, and we were putting our names and pronouns, which are the words that we use to describe ourselves and others in the third person, onto a name tag so that people knew how to refer to us. So I put on my birth name, and I wrote down he, him pronouns, which were the pronouns that I was using at the time. And I stuck it onto my chest, and something switched. I still don't know exactly what happened. I assume that it was the act of physically labeling myself with he, him pronouns, but I took off the name tag. I looked at it, and I thought to myself, this doesn't feel right now. So I took the pen that I was using, and underneath he, him, I wrote in smaller letters, they, them. I put that back on, and it didn't feel right necessarily, but it felt less wrong. And so that summer, I came out as non-binary, and I explored what it means to be non-binary. Something that I noticed within my coming out was when I came out as gay at the age of 13 or 14, I very thankfully didn't experience much homophobia, and I recognized the privilege within that. When I came out as non-binary, I started to experience some transphobia. Not at CAA. CAA was actually, in my experience, the perfect place to come out because it really gave me the opportunity to explore myself in all facets of my being. But coming out of that bubble, coming back into the quote unquote real world, if you want to call it that, I started to find that there was a lot of misinformation regarding gender diversity. Around a year later, so now we're in spring 2019, I'm walking down the streets in New York City in Manhattan. I'm on Fifth Avenue, probably somewhere in Midtown, and my brain goes, hey, you've been using they, them pronouns for just under a year. Why don't you try using she, her pronouns as well? And I went, okay, I can do that too. So that summer, I came out as trans femme. And that fall of 2019, I realized that I was the trans woman. Then we get into March of 2020, the pandemic hits. And I'm stuck in my apartment for days upon days upon days, as many of us were in our living spaces. And weirdly enough, being in a space where I was completely safe, I didn't have to go out into the world, I started to express my gender differently. I started to wear makeup, and I started to wear dresses, and I started to wear skirts and blouses, and I felt so good about myself. And the fear that I had about what are people going to think of me started to melt away because I was in the comfort of my own home constantly. I was on Zoom, but people only saw me from the top up. I didn't have to walk across the streets of Manhattan or Brooklyn. I felt completely safe. It was also around this time that I started to think about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I reevaluated that question, and I decided that I wanted to pursue a master's in education. And I applied to HUC, and I got into their Masters of Ed Leadership program in Los Angeles. And I flew back out to Los Angeles in the middle of a pandemic, and I started to take classes virtually. And it was around this time that I started to identify as a non-binary trans woman. I didn't fully feel like a binary trans person, but I still liked the label of trans woman. I used the term transfeminine at times, which meant I aligned more closely with women, but not fully. So I personally interchange the terms non-binary trans woman and trans femme, but currently I'm using non-binary trans woman. And now I'm here with all of you at this conference, and I am so grateful to be a part of it. But the most important takeaway that you should take about me is that I love popcorn, specifically from the movies. I currently have movie theater popcorn sitting in my kitchen that I will probably snack on after we are done here. So that's a little bit about me. I would like to share with you now two quick stories as a sort of set induction into the work that we're going to be doing today. The first is in spring of 2019, I was doing an artist in residency weekend at a synagogue in Florida where we were doing Jusicles. I had written a Jusicle for the Torah portion of the week, and I was working on it with kids grades 3 through 11. And on the first day we went around, we introduced ourselves with our names and our pronouns. And some of these kids didn't know what pronouns were, so I explained it to them, and they all got it pretty easily. And afterwards, one of the students came up to me and they said that I was the first person to ask them for their pronouns in an educational setting. Now, this person was also in 11th grade, so older than some of the students that we work with. But it really started to make me think about the assumption of education that we are providing to our students explicitly and implicitly. When we are working with our students, it is partially our responsibility to introduce them to these types of education, to LGBTQ plus education. It doesn't have to be, we're going to sit down and have a conversation about gender, but it can look like just asking someone what their pronouns are and then maybe explaining to them what pronouns are and giving the definition to the thing that we already use. The second story that I want to share is when I was in preschool. It's time to go home. And I said, okay, Mom. And out of my cute little Cinderella gown, I folded it up. I put it back into the bin. I don't know if that part is true, but I like to, pretend that I was a clean child. And I went home. And I felt so free hearing that because I had the freedom to express my gender expression and explore my gender in the safety of my religious school. So as we continue on with the work today, I want us to think about the different ways that we can make our spaces safer for our kids to be able to explore these sorts of things. So what I would like for us to do now is we're going to learn about some different terms within the LGBTQ plus community. So the first one is just the overarching LGBTQ plus, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and more. Some people might refer to it as the alphabet soup. This is just the overarching term of which many other terms fall under. One might call it an umbrella term. Another term when relating to gender specifically is gender expression. So this is the way that we present ourselves outwardly. This might be the clothing that we wear, the shoes that we put on, the makeup that we wear, if we're wearing any jewelry, the color, the shape, the length of our hair. This is all gender expression, which does not inherently connect to gender identity, which is the way that we feel about ourselves inwardly. So my gender identity in this moment is as a non-binary trans woman. My gender expression at the moment is wearing a white button-up with some makeup, some mascara, a necklace. But even if I'm wearing a suit, I'm still a non-binary trans woman. The way that we express ourselves might align or not align with our gender identity, but the two are not inherently connected. Now, when thinking about gender attribution, which is the gender roles and stereotypes that we typically assign to people, if I identify as a non-binary trans woman, or I'll just call myself a woman for right now, I identify as a woman. If I'm wearing a suit, some people might say, but suits are for men, which isn't true. Clothing doesn't have gender. We have gender, yes, but gender is also a social construct. So when we are using gender attribution, it's important to think about the biases and the stereotypes that we have within ourselves when we're in our classrooms. If we have a student that identifies as male and wants to wear a dress, if it's an appropriate time to do so, let them wear the dress.
Eliana, just real quick, if you want to, I think you might want to advance your slides, or maybe we're not seeing it. I just want you to know that.
What about now?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. Did you see any of this? Oh, golly gee. I had animations and everything. That's totally fine. Okay, no worries. We'll stay here. So, thank you so much for letting me know about that, Trisha. Gender attribution, the gender roles and stereotypes that are typically given. Gender creative or gender expansive is a label that we might give to someone who rejects expected gender roles and stereotypes. So this might be a child who identifies as male but wears a dress, or this might be a child who identifies as female but likes to wear her hair short and likes to get down and dirty in the mud during recess. They're still a boy or a girl, but they don't necessarily like to do the things that might be expected of them. Cisgender is the term that we use when one's gender identity aligns with the sex that they are assigned at birth. So when a person is born, a doctor usually looks in between their legs, and based off of what they see, they make a statement. This is a boy or this is a girl. Now, there are some people that are intersex, which is an umbrella term for biological diversity. It's used to describe a person's body who defies commonly understood ideas around sex, around the sex binary, or around sex being binary. And approximately 1.7% of our population in the world is intersex. Now, something that happens, which is really unfortunate, and people are working on making this illegal, is sometimes a doctor or a person gives birth, the doctor looks at the child, and there might be indeterminate sex characteristics based off of what they see when the child is born. So they whisk the child away to surgery, sometimes without the consent of the parents, to quote unquote fix the child and give them one or the other of what we might normally associate with what we find in between our legs. What this can do is this can cause a lot of confusion for the child growing up, and as well as the families, because although they may look like one thing on the outside, their body chemistry might be operating differently. So intersex people are completely normal, and they are not any different from folks that might have different parts between their legs. Transgender is a term that we use when one's gender identity does not align with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So I was assigned the sex of male at birth, but my identity is that of a woman or a trans woman. So I identify as transgender. Transgender is also considered an umbrella term for other identities, one of which is non-binary, where someone's gender identity falls outside of the categories of man or woman, falls outside of this gender binary. And finally, pronouns are the words that we use to describe each other in the third person. And we're going to talk about that right now. I'm just looking at the chat. Great. So, pronouns. What are those? They're words that we use to describe ourselves and each other in the third person, such as she, her, he, him, they, them, ze, them, xi, xer. There are lots of different words that people use for pronouns. I know some folks that use the word it as a pronoun. We might refer to those as neo-pronouns, which are pronouns that kind of go beyond the more widely known set of pronouns. Pronouns do not align with gender identity and sexual orientation. What does that mean? Let's take Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye, okay? Jonathan is fabulous. We love Jonathan. Jonathan is non-binary and uses he, she, and they pronouns interchangeably. When we think about the term non-binary, something that we might associate with that gender identity are the pronouns of they, them. But because pronouns don't directly align with gender identity or sexual orientation, we have to remember that they're two separate things. It's also important to note that one can't assume someone's pronouns just by looking at them. When we think back to the term of gender attribution, we are subconsciously, when we look at someone, we're trying to figure out, is this person a man or a woman? Because our brain really likes categories. But we can't know that unless we ask the person or they tell us. If we mess up with someone's pronouns, it's totally fine. It happens to all of us, happens to me. I think that it's really important that we don't try and make a big deal out of it, and that when we're working with our kids, if we misgender someone, to teach them by doing. To just say, oops, my bad, correct ourselves, and then move on. Something else that's important to note is that we cannot decide what someone else's pronouns are. It is a basic form of human respect. And so when we are perhaps speaking a set of pronouns that we may not necessarily be used to, it's important to think about, how do I incorporate this into my daily vocabulary? I know some people that have Post-its with someone's name and the pronouns that they use that they keep on their bathroom mirror. It's up to us to figure out how to make sure that we are giving people the same respect that we want to receive. So now let's talk about gender language in and out of the workspace. I want you to take a second and think about the language that you use when you are speaking with your class or classes or with your colleagues. When you're referring to your class as a whole, do you use the word guys? Do you say boys and girls? Do you perhaps use more gender neutral language like folks or friends or class or you all or y'all? Once I used the word y'all in my 4th and 5th grade class when I was teaching in New York City, and one of my students, a very sassy, lovely young man, turned to me and went, "Why did you say y'all? You're not from the South?" And I said, "Well, because I want to be inclusive of everyone who's in the class." And then the student said, "Well, why don't you just say boys and girls?" And I said, "Well, not everyone in the room is a boy or a girl." And he said, "Yes, we are." And I said, "I'm not a boy or a girl." And then we had a really lovely conversation about what it means to be non-binary. We can also never assume one's gender. Similarly to how we can't know someone's pronouns just by looking at them, we can also not really know someone's gender just by looking at them. When we think of a non-binary person, some folks might think of them as being very androgynous, being a bit indeterminate as to like, what category can my brain put them in? Were they assigned male at birth or female at birth? They might be assigned one thing, they might be assigned another thing, they might look a specific way, but we can't assume the gender that they identify with. Now, something else is that children label themselves. It's not up to us. What we can do is provide a healthy environment to help them explore that gender. Children understand what gender is by around the age of 2, and they might start to label themselves by around the age of 3. That's super young. Our students are watching our every move when we're teaching in the classroom. So if we use the words boys and girls, or if we use the word guys when we're referring to the class, our children are going to internalize that. If one of our students is wearing a dress and he identifies as a boy and we ask him to please get out of that dress, dresses are for girls, another student who might wanted to have done that might internalize that and think, oh, I can't wear a dress, I'm a boy. I can't do that. Our students are like hawks. They love to intake information. So how do we make our classrooms a place for them to intake information and for them to grow as people with chesed, with kindness, with kavod, respect? One of the things that we could do is we could add our pronouns on Zoom. This is a thing that Zoom has actually built in a function for us to do on the Zoom website. But if you feel comfortable right now, I would like to invite everyone to change or add your pronouns into your name. The way that you can do that is by hovering over your own screen, and you can click on the top 3 dots in the top right of your screen. I'm trying to remember how to do this because I'm screen sharing so I don't see myself. And then there should be is there a button that says change name? If you click that, and then at the very end of it, in parentheses, you can put in your pronouns if you like to, or in your first name, or at the very beginning. But this creates a space for, I'll speak for myself, like for me as a non-binary person, as a non-binary trans person who isn't cis, it lets me know that this is a space for me to share my identity. I don't have to worry as much about transphobia, homophobia. Now, something else that I want to say is that adding our pronouns is a great way to do this, but not everyone feels comfortable doing that. There might be some people that may not want to add their pronouns for safety reasons, or because they're still figuring out their pronouns, or because they might not fully understand why it's important to do that. So I don't think that it's mandatory for us to do that, but it is something to consider. Let's talk about Judaism and gender for a little bit. So in Judaism, in our sacred text, there are 6 terms, 6 sexes within sex variants. One is zachar, which we might translate to the word male. One is nekeva, which we might translate to female. Androgynos is someone who has both male and female physical sexual characteristics. One is tumtum, who is someone whose sexual characteristics might be indeterminate. We might refer to this person in modern day as intersex. One is ilonit, which we might refer to as someone who is a trans man. And saris, which is someone that we might refer to as a trans woman. There are tons of references to these 6 sex variants. Over 100 in our Mishnah and Talmud, over 350 in classic Midrashim. They're found all over, you just have to look for them. One of my favorite things about Judaism and gender is found within our creation story. Genesis 1:27 translates roughly to, and God created man in God's image, in the image of God, God created him, male and female, God created them. I want us to center in on that last little bit for just a moment. Male and female God created them. One way that we could interpret this is as God created man and woman, Adam and Eve. Another way that we could interpret this is a male and female God, a bi-gender God, perhaps a non-binary God, created them, non-binary people. The way that we interpret our texts is a great opportunity for us to intertwine Judaism and LGBTQ+ education with our students. At HUC, for my capstone project, I am developing a curriculum guide to teach LGBTQ+ education to high schoolers through Jusicles. So I'm currently sifting through a bunch of different Jewish texts to try and find different ways to connect. So for example, there will be a lesson on coming out. There's going to be a Jusicle sung from the perspective of Esther the night before she tells the king that she's Jewish. There's going to be a lesson on gender expression, which is going to draw from a third century text, midrash, of a rabbi who saw someone in a river, thought the person was a woman, fell in love, the person was actually a man. So what does that say about this person's gender expression and sexual orientation? The last thing that I want to talk about within this is gendered Hebrew. Hebrew is a very gendered language. There are a lot of people that are currently actively working on making it more gender inclusive. But when we are working with our students, thinking about some different gender neutral or gender inclusive terms that we can use. So for example, instead of saying bar or bat mitzvah, we could say bi mitzvah, because b'nai is still within the masculine plural. Instead of saying madrachim, we could say madrachol, which is a gender neutral term for either a singular madrachol or the madrachol as a whole group. We'd like now to introduce you to the gender unicorn. This is a graphic that is used in some spaces to teach LGBTQ+ education to kids, and everyone, actually. I've learned from this as an adult, and I'm happy to share this afterwards. One quick caveat that I do want to note is that when we are looking at these arrows, I want us to think about them not necessarily as a gradient, but as a spectrum. So thinking about it where it loops back and someone can go all the way around as opposed to from one end to the other. There are 5 areas within this gender unicorn. The first is gender identity, the way that we feel about ourselves personally, the way that we identify ourselves. Gender expression, which is the way that we present ourselves outwardly. Our sex that we were assigned at birth, female, male, intersex. Physical attraction, which might look like I really want to hold someone's hand or give them a kiss or give them a hug. And emotional attraction, which might look like being around this person makes me feel really good inside. It makes me so happy when I get to play Legos with my best friend. I love getting to color alongside this person. Physical and emotional attraction are two separate things that sometimes we put together. I know before I saw this graphic, I smushed them together, but in actuality, they're two separate areas. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a scenario activity. So we're going to be broken up into 4 groups, and each group has a different scenario for one of the 4 categories: gender identity, gender expression, physical attraction, and emotional attraction. We're going to have around 10 minutes in these groups. And while you're in your groups, take a second to introduce yourselves if you would like to get to know each other. Read through the scenario, and then there is a question at the end that something along the lines of, how would you respond to this? You are the educator in this situation. When we come back, I'm going to ask that we have 1 or maybe 2 people from each group that shares what your group has spoken about. So just be prepared for that. Does anyone have any questions about the activity that we are going to do now? And there will be time for a Q&A at the end. I know that I'm throwing a lot of information at you. To the breakout room.
Sorry.
It's totally fine. No worries. Hi again. We're going to go back into our breakout rooms in just a moment. Does everyone here have their scenarios in the chat? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nods. I'm going to assume that we have at least 1 person from every group that is nodding their heads. So we are going to go back into our breakout rooms for around 10 minutes. Please continue your introductions if you were doing so, and if you would like to. I'm going to hop around if you have any questions. Have fun.
Eliana, how do we know which group, which scenario?
Great question. So when you are put into your breakout room, it should tell you which group you are in. On the document that I shared, each of the 4 scenarios has a group assigned. Any other questions?
Can you share that document in the chat, maybe?
I'm going to reclaim host for a minute. Oh no, wait, did you make her host? Wait, you're muted.
She's fine because she's going to go around each of the rooms.
Okay,
That's what, I guess that's what she was doing before and I didn't see it.
sorry.
That's why I was trying to find her. I'm like, where is she? To move her, you know? Oops.
Through the Zoom of space. Thank you. I hope your trip back was easy. I would love for us to go just from group 1, 2, 3, 4. If we could have someone or someone's from each group give a short rehash as to what you were speaking on, and then talk a little bit about the discussion that you had. So if you would like to speak from group 1, you can either unmute yourself or you can go to the reactions tab at the bottom and click raise hand, just so we know who's going to be speaking.
We didn't really talk about it, but I can speak unless anybody else from the group wants to.
Go for it, Becca.
Thanks,
Cool.
Becca.
So our conversation kind of started with someone saying, well, I would want to ask the parents how they thought before I had that conversation. And then kind of, I think, going back to especially things that we just talked about with Rachel Hall and Tani, is like, well, what can we do in this moment to make sure, right? Let's not let that be, that is important, right? We do want to know what both children's parents, how they would react, how they would respond, what words they would use, what language they would use, but we can't let that be a barrier to communicating in the moment, to helping solve the issue in the moment. And so we kind of talked about making sure that Tom, should I explain my scenario or did people see that?
If you could just give a brief.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay.
Sorry. Okay. jumped right in. So our scenario was that Thomas, a cisgender male child who likes to, we had gender expression. So Thomas likes to wear dresses sometimes or skirts, but is cisgender. So his gender identity matches the sex that he was assigned at birth. And in the scenario, he was walking, wearing a dress and holding a stack of books, and another child saw him and pushed the books out of his hand and said, like called Thomas gay and a girl. And so one of the things that we talked about, like a couple of things, one being we would want to immediately in the moment make sure that Thomas was okay, right? So checking on Thomas's emotional and physical well-being and making sure that he felt safe and comfortable in that moment and affirmed. And also talking and making sure that the other child maybe asking like some clarifying questions or just having a quick conversation about like, what do you mean by that? Like, what does gay mean? Why did you use that? Why did you use that phrase? Or what were you trying to say, basically, right? Trying to get out of the child who might have been modeling language that they may or may not even understand, to kind of elaborate so we can kind of get more to the root of that. And then the other thing we talked about that Fern brought up was, which I think is really, really important, is making sure that we're also helping Thomas learn some self-advocacy in that moment, right? Helping to support Thomas's growth and development in helping him be able to say, please stop, or I don't like that, or kind of advocating for himself when in those kind of scenarios.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Becca. Thank you everyone from that group. One thing that I would like to highlight from that that was touched upon was we as the educators are with our students for a certain number of hours a day, a certain number of days a week, but then they go somewhere else. They might go back to families and adults that might not be as informed or as accepting of the LGBTQ plus community. So it's that managing that teaching dilemma of when something is happening, how do we weigh the values of what's going on and then make a choice from there, knowing that it might not necessarily be the best choice, but also knowing that there isn't really a best choice regardless. It's about taking the information that you have and making a decision from there. Thank you so much. Someone from group 2, gender identity.
I'll go for our group. So our scenario was that a child named Farzana is coming out as trans femme and using they them pronouns, and asked their friends for help in like reinforcing that with the other kids. And a boy in the class laughed and said, "What do you mean he can't even be gay? He's Muslim." So we found a lot of problems in the scenario. The boys making assumptions that like all Muslim people are anti-gay or homophobic. They're conflating gender identity and sexual orientation. And this, the boy speaking can't possibly know what Farzana's gender identity is because it's inside Farzana. And so we thought that it would be important. We had a lot of questions about how old these kids were and like that would determine a little bit what our plan would be, but that we would take the boy aside first to sort of confront like why he thinks that, or maybe not first, but we would take the boy aside, confront why he thinks that, talk about like that you can't know by looking, that gay and trans are not the same thing necessarily, that some of the assumptions, and then checking in with Farzana, first of all, to see that they're okay, to help them through processing through that experience, and then sort of getting a sense of how comfortable they feel with sharing their story, that it's our responsibility as the educators to use this as a teachable moment for the class, but you also don't want to do it by spotlighting someone who's not ready to be spotlit. And so sort of making the decision based on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you everyone from group 2. Something that brings up within me is when speaking with the child who made those comments, I wonder about the intention of confrontation with the child versus curiosity. Why did the child respond this way? Maybe there is something going on at home, or they've been exposed to different thought processes, and trying to unpack it while also thinking about, was this child doing it with malicious intent, or were they just mimicking someone else that they might have seen? Thank you. Someone from group 3, physical attraction.
Stephanie, I don't know if it's you or me. We can share it. Fill in the blanks if I leave anything out. So our scenario is about 2 kiddos, Shira and Margaret. Shira loves spending time with Margaret. And one day she gets very upset. She comes up to you and says that she had asked Margaret if she could give her a kiss, and Margaret said sure. And when she did, one of the classmates said, that's not okay for 2 girls. A girl can kiss a boy can kiss a girl, but not 2 girls. And our conversation meandered all over the place about how to respond. We covered actually consent, which was really exciting to hear. Well, did Margaret say it was okay? Then it's okay, right? You ask someone if it's okay before you touch them, and that person said okay, and okay. We talked about sharing that girls can kiss girls, boys can kiss boys. I'm not saying this in the nicest way that we did earlier. And we also talked about what messages kids are hearing at home, just like you touched on, Eliana, that they are bringing with them to school. Stephanie, what did I miss?
I mean, I think you covered most. I think you covered most of it. I think we also talked about the idea of making sure that our classrooms are inclusive in the materials and the way in which we present things, so that of course it's fine for a little girl to give another little girl a kiss on the cheek, or another boy, and that they're seeing that in their daily interactions in the classroom, whether it's through books or if there's posters on the wall, or just knowing about each other's family structures, and just making sure, because that representation, they're soaking it all in through the materials and the visuals. And so that was another piece of it that we talked about, but I think you covered the rest of it pretty well, Rachel.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I love the notion of classroom materials showcasing inclusivity and celebrating family diversity. I think that's wonderful. Someone from group 4, which was emotional attraction. That's all right. No worries at all. Group 4 was talking about...
I can do it.
Oh,
it's
great.
fine.
Thank you.
I would have jumped in, but I had to get up and handle something. I have no idea how the conversation ended. I'm sorry.
No worries.
It's okay. So we had a scenario where 2 boys had been close friends for their whole lives, and they were affectionate toward each other, and another friend told them that they were gay, that they had to be gay. I mean, I think I just, did I miss any part of the story? And again, we didn't know how old the children were, but I mean, the first thing that we talked about was that nobody gets to tell anybody anything about their identity, that's an internal thing. We talked about how we had some really good points, that there are so many things that are acceptable when 2 girls do it as opposed to 2 boys, that 2 girls can walk arm in arm and their arms around each other around the playground and or around the mall, and nobody thinks otherwise. But if you see 2 boys doing it, it's automatic assumption, and that it's part of our jobs to make sure that we really start from when they're young, having them understand that physical expression of friendship is fine, no matter whether you're 2 girls, 2 boys, boys, girls, non-binary, etc. We talked about Carol, what was the point you were making at the end, which was really good? Will you share, please?
Yeah, so I don't even remember, but I do remember, I mean, it was 10 minutes ago, I don't remember. But we were talking about how just because you emotionally have feelings for something or somebody doesn't mean that you are gay. Like you can love your dog, and that doesn't mean that you are now a dog lover gender person, right? So we made those points. If you give me a head start on what I said that you thought was brilliant, because I don't remember, I will
Well,
fill in the rest.
But no, I think it was, we were saying how also a lot of times relationships get sexualized, especially in an early childhood classroom. You'll hear
Right.
teachers saying, oh, their boyfriend and girlfriend, or like, aren't they cute? They make a cute couple and they have a crush, and how inappropriate that is. But it's often heard in classrooms and by teachers. Okay, sorry, and I will be mindful of time. We can, but that was basically the gist of it, about how, that you, I know what it was, Carol. You said that you did.
It was about
Yes, it was
asking
about
about
that the person accusing them of being gay may
needs.
also be exploring their own sexuality, and that you have to be cognizant of the fact that maybe in their mind they are sort of projecting what they feel on somebody else, and that we need to be supportive of that person, not only with education, but understanding they may be having their own struggle. Right?
Thank you. I was brilliant. Thank you.
Yes.
I have no memory, but I am brilliant.
Thank you both very much. Two quick things that I want to touch upon is the notion that it's not okay for two boys to be physically affectionate, but it's okay for two girls to be physically affectionate. Intersectionality is a term when multiple points of identity intersect. So in this case, if we have two young boys who like to be physically, touchy with each other, they call each other brothers, that might intersect with masculinity and toxic masculinity. Men have to be men. That's not true. Men are totally allowed to express their emotions just as much as women. Another thing that I want to touch upon, and I don't believe that this was done with ill intent, there has been a conversation in the past about comparing two men or two people of the same sex with a lot of other harmful narratives, such as it being like two animals. So when we are having these conversations, making sure that we are being mindful of that and not comparing that to a person loving an animal. Again, I don't believe that any harm was done. I want to be mindful of the time. We are going to take a few moments for a Q&A, but if you have to hop off, I put my email in the chat, and thank you so much for joining. For those that are able to stay, I'm going to put a Padlet into the chat. This Padlet is a space for you to ask questions. You can do so with your name or anonymously. We'll take a few minutes to talk through some of these, and then we will be on our merry way. Hi, Lila. Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you're here. Sorry, amazing theater maker. Okay, so we are going to take a look at the Padlet. And thank you, Trisha, for putting in some of the other sessions that will be happening later today.
Are there any questions in the Padlet, Eliana?
They are still coming in. But again, if you have to hop off or if we have to end the session, totally fine.
No.
Cool.
We did a long walk, Hal.
So in order to add a question to the Padlet, you can just double click on the page. Okay, one comes in, suggestions to respond to parents who don't get behind inclusive practices. That is a really good question. That doesn't really have one specific answer. Some thoughts of how to do this is, instead of responding to that one parent specifically, you could send something out to the entire family or excuse me, the entire class and their families with resources. If you would like to, if you want to have a conversation with the family and you feel it's appropriate and it will be productive, that's something else that you can do. There is a plus symbol that needs to be clicked. Oh, there's also a plus symbol at the bottom right. Thank you, Rachel. But thinking about maybe not singling out the family, presenting it to the entire community, speaking with your supervisor if you have a supervisor, or with your teachers, making sure that everyone is united within this, working with your staff to talk about appropriate responses so that there's not a lot of confusion between folks. Sexuality versus gender. Is gay sexuality? Great question. Yes. When the term gay is being used, it is within the world of sexuality. Some people use the word gay to mean between two people of the same sex. Historically, it's been used between two men. Lesbian is a term that has been used historically between two women. I do know some people within the LGBTQ plus community that use the word gay as a catch-all. Other people use the word queer as a catch-all. Queer has historically been a slur used against LGBTQ plus folks, specifically within sexuality, and predominantly now is only used by by members of the LGBTQ plus community as a way to reclaim that term. But yes, gay is asexuality. Will I share tools for? Oh, great! Yes, I do have some resources that I will put into the chat. Oh my goodness gracious. Everything is opening up right now. So there are 3 websites. One is from Keshet. There's lots of great pronoun information and games. There's another pronoun activity that you can do, as well as from the Human Rights Campaign that has a lot of terminology for LGBTQ plus terms. Something to note is that terms are consistently being created, and these websites don't always have the most up-to-date information, so cross-referencing is really important. Do I have a good way to explain what a pronoun is to a 2 or 3-year-old? Ooh, I love this question. I think that when explaining it to someone that is that young, explaining it and saying something along the lines of, like, what's something that you really like to do? And if the child says, I really like to go to the beach, you could say, well, if I'm talking to someone else about you and I say, oh, he really wants to go to the beach, the word he is a pronoun. So let's say that the child is talking to me and I'm using she, her pronouns. So if I really like to go to the beach and you're talking to someone else, what could you say to them? She likes to go to the beach. Giving a very explicit example, something super concrete, and then having them act upon that is something that comes to my mind. Okay. I think that we're going to pause here. I'm going to put some of my information into the chat. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Ooh, that's not what I wanted to type. There we go. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This has been really wonderful. I have loved learning alongside you. I put my email and my website into the chat. If you have any questions or would like to get in touch, you can do so either through my email or there's a contact link in my website. I hope that you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Lahitra Oat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eliana. Thank you for your openness and sharing so much of yourself and your knowledge with us. It is vital that we all continue to gain a better understanding of the history, terminology, and specific needs of the LGBTQ plus community in all its facets and colors. I have been so grateful for this opportunity to learn from and with you. Eliana, in addition to their work in LGBTQ plus education and advocacy, Eliana is an artist and musician with so much incredible content, from things like a hilarious and adorable series of videos in which she impersonates Elmo having a bar mitzvah, and everyone in the congregation watching, to some new music coming out soon that you can look out for. If for those of you who are wanting to see what brilliant and amazing things Eliana does when she grows up, you can find her website, like she said, in the chat, and on Instagram, Eliana Rubin, and all kinds of other social media platforms. I found you on TikTok, which is, I'm sure, as you're realizing, a theme in this conference, everyone. My name is Becca Towdy. I use she and they pronouns. I'm the assistant director of the Child Development Center at Congregation Beth Israel in Austin, Texas, and a very proud member of the Kallah Planning Committee. A few reminders for everyone before we talk about our next session. If you have not signed up for the Remind app, you can do so by texting at ECE-RJ 22 to 81010. This is how we will continue communicating about announcements or anything else we need to share about upcoming sessions. All of our sessions are being recorded and will be available only to paid participants after the conclusion of the conference. We ask that you not share these links with anyone else, but we will have an opportunity for colleagues to buy in to just the recordings if they are interested. Our next session is tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be a wonderful panel discussion that I'm very excited to experience and also moderate, called Marginalized Voices Within Our Jewish Communities. It is going to include a number of different people from all kinds of different backgrounds and who have had very differing variety of experiences within Jewish communities around the country. So please join us at 7 p.m. Eastern, and thank you all so much for being here. And
Thank you,
again.
everyone.